Many people thought of Rowena Philo, the mistress of Duke Killian of Devonshire, that she was a greedy upstart who seduced him with her beauty in order to bask in luxury. One day, a girl was sitting at the dressing table, which was located behind a screen, putting her face in order. While powdering her face, she heard three girls she didn't know discussing what kind of dress she was wearing. One of them said that it seems that the Duke even gave her family jewelry, not to mention a luxurious dress. They discussed how they were sick of how absolutely every man drooled over the girl, and that the Duke of Devonshire had no dignity whatsoever. A guard entered the room, informing Miss Filone that his lordship was waiting for her in the carriage. The three ladies immediately began to babble about the fact that they had not at all expected that the subject of their conversation was sitting behind the screen. Rowena calmly stood up from the dressing table and walked towards the guard with a calm expression. As soon as she got into the carriage, the coachman immediately set off, driving the horses with all his might. The Duke of Devonshire was already waiting for her inside, and he simply watched her for several minutes. The silence was interrupted by his question about what was wrong this time, to which the girl clarified what he was talking about. Looking at her with a cold gaze, he said that he had fulfilled her request as she wanted. A little embarrassed, she said that she did not want to upset him and asked him not to worry about her, after which she thanked him for being able to find time for her. Before she could finish saying that she really liked the opera, the girl felt his hand on her chin. The man grabbed her tightly and asked why she was frowning, after which he added that he would not grovel before his mistress. Rowena looked at him tenderly, trying to get out of her head the words of the three ladies that they were sick of knowing her. All she said out loud was that she was a little tired, that's why she looked like that, and then asked for forgiveness. Killian sternly said that since she herself knows that she was guilty, she must accept the punishment. He extended his hand to her and imperiously ordered her to take off her snow-white glove. The man still continued to look at her coldly, which caused goosebumps to run down her body. Swallowing nervously, the girl began to reach for the glove, but he abruptly pulled his hand back. The Duke said in an indifferent voice that she must do this not with her hands, but with her mouth. He repeated it again to make sure she heard his order, which confused her even more. Seeing that she was doing nothing, the man asked if she was going to apologize. Rowena, blushing completely at such a request, quietly announced that she would carry out the order. Satisfied with the answer, the Duke smiled slightly and again extended his hand to her. This time, the rising girl reached for the glove with her whole body to remove it with her mouth. Watching her slowly remove her glove, Killian licked his lips. After his mistress had completed her task, he moved closer to her with a sharp movement. Pressing her against the wall, the Duke kissed her passionately, despite the shaking carriage. The next day, in the mansion, the girl was being combed by a maid, who said that the Duke had a good time since he sent her a bouquet and new shoes. When asked if her mistress liked it, Rowena said without interest that she also had a good time. The maid said that she was very jealous of her, because even in 3 months she could not save up for the cheapest ticket, but she had always dreamed of going there. The girl said that she always dreamed of becoming a singer, and her mistress told that she once wanted to become a writer. The maid remembered that her uncle was a famous writer, to which the girl confirmed, saying that his name was Jeremy Dish. She recalled the day her uncle saw her off, saying that they would always be glad to see her back. The servant cried out that she had heard so much about him because he was a famous detective writer. She then asked if he really lived in seclusion and never appeared in public. The maid was interested in what he looked like, but she herself thought that he was handsome if he looked even a little like her mistress. Rowena embarrassedly said that she had no idea whether they would meet again. The last time she saw him was 3 years ago, right before she boarded the train to the capital, driven by dreams of becoming a writer, thanks to a friend who convinced her to leave, where she met the Duke. The girl no longer spoke to her maid because she was thinking about at what point in time everything went wrong. Suddenly, an elderly lady entered the room and said that she had something to tell Miss Filone. The maid was afraid of the woman, and the girl politely invited her to enter the room. The woman who came was the housekeeper of the estate, whom everyone called Madame Gertrude. The woman apologized for disturbing her at such an early hour, but then said that it was time for her to go to Rockford. Hearing this, Rowena protested that it was too early, to which Madame explained that the schedule had changed slightly. The girl was afraid that something had happened, so she asked if the Duke was going with her. Adjusting her glasses, Madame Gertrude looked at her angrily and answered in the negative. The Duke's mistress knew she couldn't ask why he was staying, so she simply accepted it. When leaving, the woman said that she would tell the maids to prepare everything for departure, because she was leaving in 2 days at lunchtime. Finally, she took out a letter and said that it was from a publishing company. Rowena was very happy that the publishers had finally responded to her about her book. She quickly grabbed the letter in her hands, burning with impatience to see what kind of answer they sent. Madame Gertrude looked displeased at everything that was happening and adjusted her glasses again. Immediately after this, the woman went straight to the Duke of Devonshire's office. He, as often happened, sat at his desk, clearing away the accumulated cases. Coming closer to him, the woman said that she had conveyed his words to Miss Filoni, to which he thanked her and said that she could go. Madame Gertrude asked him directly why he could not leave her. She added that his aunt, the Marchioness of Wessex, asked him to tell him that the Queen had invited the daughter of an overseas magnate who just needed a worthy match. The man looked at her without interest and said that since his aunt decided to be a matchmaker, it means she will receive something in return. Madame Gertrude was seriously frightened when she saw how his gaze became cold-blooded. Taking off his glasses, Killian asked if she really wanted to say that Miss Filoni had already fulfilled her role and was no longer needed. He remembered how Her Majesty asked him if he was really just trying to annoy her, to which he replied that he did not understand at all what they were talking about. The woman sighed heavily and asked if he really didn't think about his pride. Looking towards his mistress, she said that everyone had noticed how much she looked like his ex-fiancée. The man also looked in that direction, but thought about the answer for a while. Taking a glass of wine, he said that he did not care about the deceased, after which he added that Rowena would never become a duchess and would never carry his child. When the woman asked what he wanted then, he calmly answered that he wanted them to stop wooing him with foreign princesses and daughters of rich men. Her Majesty calmly informed him that he would soon get bored with the girl anyway, after which Rowena began to be treated as the Duke's companion. However, 3 years later, he understood that the Queen was probably angry that he was not even going to get rid of his mistress. His thoughts were interrupted by Madame Gertrude, who reported that one of the girls of marriageable age was also a green-eyed blonde. She added that the Marchioness had seen her with her own eyes, and, according to her, she was even more like his bride than Miss Filoni. After listening to the woman, the Duke of Devonshire began to laugh quietly, which took the speaker by surprise. His laughter grew louder and louder every second until she asked what was wrong. He pierced her with an icy gaze and coldly declared that he had already forgotten what she looked like. The man thought that for some reason everyone thought that he was in love with someone whom he had only seen once, and even then in childhood. Killian met Rowena while returning from his fiancée's funeral. That day, he decided that he was again able to see the deceased girl, but he understood that she was a completely different lady. Madame Gertrude asked him if he really would not get rid of the one who was of no use. The Duke looked her up and down and sternly informed her that she belonged to him, after which he asked why he should part with his beloved pet. In response to her answer that because of her he couldn't find a bride, the man coldly remarked that his mother had died a long time ago, hinting that it was none of her business. The woman bowed obediently and apologized to her master, to which he released her. Madame Gertrude asked if there was one more thing she could tell him, and after his affirmative nod, she said that in her opinion, Miss Filoni had been unfaithful to him. At the same time, a carriage with Rowena and her maid arrived in one of the city's districts. The girl was holding in her hands a letter from the publisher, which contained a detailed address where they would meet. The maid was worried about why they came to such an area, because they were going to buy groceries. She also asked why there were men's clothes in her mistress's bag. Rowena took Melissa's hand and asked her to promise that she wouldn't tell anyone anything. When her parents went on their long-delayed honeymoon, they contracted an infection and died suddenly, and none of her relatives cared about the orphan. But in the end, her mother's younger brother, Uncle Jeremy, agreed to look after her. For the next 20 years, she lived in the suburbs in almost complete isolation, until one day she received a letter from a friend in the capital. It said that she could send her work to any publisher in the capital and calmly wait for a response at her home. The girl, without hesitation, jumped on the train and went to a completely unfamiliar place, after which her friend left her with a bunch of debts, and she constantly had to hide from debt collectors. The friend explained her action by saying that she had no other choice. Her uncle earned good money, so he would be able to cover all his debts. Thus, Rowena was left penniless and on the run from bad people. She never decided to turn to her uncle for help because he dissuaded her from going to the capital. Hiding from the next collectors, the girl got wet in the rain and listened with bated breath as the footsteps slowly died down. Sinking to the ground, she cried bitterly from the realization that she had to obey her uncle. A carriage, which she had not noticed at first, suddenly drove up to the alley where she was hiding. A mysterious voice called to her, addressing her with respect, so she raised her eyes in amazement. The Duke of Devonshire, whom she had previously met on the train, stepped out of the carriage. Their relationship could have developed completely differently, but he was not the type to declare his love. Spending nights with him, she absolutely imagined that he loved her. The girl also seemed to love him unconditionally with all her heart. Rowena wanted to become a successful writer so that one day she could repay her debt to her master. His mistress hoped to one day become his equal, after which he would be able to recognize her. Now, sitting in the carriage, the girl explained to her maid that it was for this reason that she sent her books to the publishing house. Melissa said that she had no idea about this at all, and then asked why she should dress up as a man, to which the Duke's mistress replied that it was just a precaution, because she could be recognized. After some time, she was already sitting in the publishing house's living room and discussing her book. The man said his name was William Zeno and he was the president of a publishing company. Rowena made her voice a little rougher and lower, after which she said that her name was Philip McCartney and she was very glad to meet you. The president of the publishing house suggested getting straight to the point because he liked the draft, but wanted to make some changes regarding the number of places the main character goes. He proposed, in addition to luxury restaurants, 5-star hotels and yachts, also adding noisy bars, parks flooded with sunlight, and a flowery lakeside. The girl sadly told him that she would not be able to describe these places, because she had never been to them. The man offered to fix it and take a walk in Conwell Park the next day, after which he did not explain the details, citing the fact that he had another meeting. Sending out Rowena, who did not understand anything, William told her not to forget about tomorrow. As soon as the girl got into the carriage, the maid immediately began asking her about how everything went and whether they signed a contract, to which she tiredly replied that she did not understand everything yet, so she would tell her later. Duke Killian Devonshire allowed his mistress quite a lot, forgiving her small mistakes and treating her with due respect despite the fact that she was lower in status than him. Moreover, he never locked her in the estate and allowed her to go out at will. But there was one rule that could not be broken under any circumstances. When the Duke returned home, Rowena should have been waiting for him in the bedroom. Therefore, when the maid and mistress returned to the estate, Madame Gertrude was already waiting for them, saying that they were late. She added that the Duke was already waiting for her, to which the girl said that he had arrived early. Madame Gertrude said that she did not have time to get herself in order, and she must go to the Duke's room. The man was sitting on the sofa, drinking wine, waiting for his mistress to come. Hearing a knock on the door, he said in a stern voice that she could enter the room. Rowena looked at him worriedly, thinking that most likely she would not be well. Killian leaned his elbows on the sofa, and in response to her words that he had arrived much earlier, he replied that such things happen. Sitting down next to him, the girl thought that since he had not changed his clothes yet, it meant he had just returned, but she wondered out loud why he was drinking wine alone. As he poured her a glass of wine, he began to talk about how he once had a dog. The man said that it was a gift from the Queen, a wonderful hound with shiny black fur. He explained that she was also smart and carried out all his commands gracefully. Handing her a piece of cheese, the Duke fell silent for a moment, trying to understand whether she had made the analogy. The girl obediently ate a piece of cheese under Killian's watchful, chilling gaze. He continued to talk about how she was so smart that she would bring back the game she had shot before he could give the command. But one day, something happened. The man said that she broke loose and ran away, and when she returned, she turned out to be pregnant, having gotten pregnant from some mongrel, after which she began to rub against his leg as if nothing had happened. Rowena was delighted by such an interesting story, realizing that the dog had given birth to little puppies. While watching his mistress, the Duke said that he waited until his dog gave birth. He added that he found a male dog that looked like puppies and killed them all right in front of his dog. Rising from the couch, Killian said that the dog tried to bite him, so he killed it, and since then, he has not owned a dog. Looking at her with a chilling gaze, he threateningly declared that he would not spare the dog that betrayed him. The next morning, she was woken up by a maid saying that she had an appointment in the park with someone from the publishing house, to which the sleepy girl asked her if she had really told about it. Pushing her hair behind her ear, she suggested that she shouldn't go anywhere after all, because she had upset the Duke and he might not understand everything that way. Melissa listened calmly and pulled back the curtains to let sunlight into the room. After a short silence, the girl announced that she had to confess something. The maid timidly reported that she had read her manuscript, which was in her bag, which she had left in the carriage. After that, she approached her mistress and explained that she understood little about literature, but it seemed to her that her mistress was incredibly talented. She added that she couldn't watch her release such a rare opportunity in case she could sign a contract. Rowena was very embarrassed by such sincerity of her maid, so she could not utter a word. Melissa screamed loudly about how this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that if she was sent to Rockford, she wouldn't be back in town for 6 months. The Duke's mistress looked kindly at the girl and said that she was right, so she would go to the meeting. After her fiery speech, Madame Gertrude opened the doors with all her might, but there was no one behind them. Adjusting her glasses, she closed the door and back, after which she headed towards the maids. Approaching the 3 girls, she sternly said that if she again notices that they are fooling around, who will fire them all? Rowena stood right outside the doors, holding the ill-fated bucket in her hands, which betrayed her presence. The next day, she went into the city again, and the maid told her that she hoped that her mistress would give her a copy of the first book. As she walked up to the president of the publishing house, she couldn't get the maid's conversations out of her head. The girl sincerely hoped that these were just vile rumors spread by unknowing people. In the 3 years that they were together, she never noticed that he missed his bride. The Duke showed enough attention to her and never mentioned the deceased. The man was as polite as possible to her, treating her to sweets and covering her with a coat on a cold day. Now, sitting with the president of the publishing house, she listened to the question of whether she had made the agreed-upon edits. Rowena happily replied that she had done everything and suggested that the story had become much better. William took her manuscript and said that he would immediately look at the novel she had written. Shortly before this, Madame Gertrude handed him a large wad of money, saying that he would need to play a role. Adjusting her glasses, she said that the role would be very simple, so he should not worry. Handling the paper in his hands, the man thought that the novel was really not as bad as he thought. He looked at the worried girl, because of course he knew that she was a girl, thinking that in their world, everything is about money. William said out loud that as soon as the editor checked the manuscript, it would be possible to send it to print. To her surprise, the man stood up, opened the window, and calmly stated that of course he would do it. Looking down the street, he saw a suspicious man with a newspaper looking out the window. The stranger quickly turned away, giving a sign that everything was going according to plan. William grinned contentedly and thought about how he assumed they would be watched. At the same time, the Duke of Devonshire visited a luxurious restaurant where the waiter immediately offered to accompany him. He led him to a room where there was a half-naked man with two ladies. One of them fed him grapes, not suspecting that it was the illegitimate son of Count Felix. After eating a grape, the guy finally noticed the Duke of Devonshire entering. Looking at him, he loudly asked what he owed such an honor that the Duke himself came to him. The man looked sternly at the guy and asked if he was still living like trash. After being kissed, Felix asked with interest whether he was surprised by this way of life. Realizing that this would be a long conversation, he said goodbye to the girls who asked him to call them more often. Sitting down on the sofa, Killian boldly asked why he called him over, to which the guy was surprised that he got to the point so quickly. Seeing his indignant look, Felix realized that the newcomer did not intend to linger in this place. While tying his robe, the guy talked about how alcohol was being smuggled illegally through the South Port. The Queen imposed a strict ban on the import of alcohol, so now only labeled wine was sold in Islewood, and for violating this law, a person was sentenced to death. But despite all the risks, some still engaged in smuggling in order to make more profit. When Felix asked what he would do, since he asked not to advertise this investigation, the man lit a cigarette and calmly said that he was not going to interfere. The guy was very surprised and asked if he really decided to hand over the Queen. To his question about whether he really did not have enough money, the Duke replied that it was all a matter of power. He stated that he wanted no one else to dare to dictate to him, so he wanted to surpass the Queen. Felix thoughtfully asked if he was building up power behind her back. Not intending to answer this, Killian reminded him that he asked to know something else. The guy handed him a note, saying that he was the president of a publishing company, after which he added that they walked in the park and then went to a restaurant, but Miss Falone was dressed as a man. He added that he did not understand why this was, but they were always talking about some kind of manuscript. Looking at the photograph, the Duke of Devonshire saw his mistress receiving a rose from a stranger. His gaze became completely indifferent and cold, because the puzzle in his head had finally come together. Getting into the carriage, the Duke strictly ordered to be taken straight to the estate to Miss Falone. He asked his assistant to keep an eye on Gertrude, saying that he needed someone as inconspicuous as possible. The man quickly wrote in his notebook and then said that the Marchioness of Wessex was going to visit him. He added that he assumed that she should have already arrived at the estate. When the Duke arrived at the mansion, the Marquise was already waiting for him with Gertrude and Rowena. The woman lovingly hugged her nephew, and when he asked how she was doing, she answered that it could be better. While she was talking to the Queen, the man involuntarily glanced at his mistress. The girl tried her best to hide her face behind her hair so that he wouldn't notice anything. Without listening to his aunt, the Duke of Devonshire went straight to Rowena, asking if she was all right. As soon as she raised her face, he immediately noticed that there was a huge bruise on her cheek from the blow. The man looked at him sternly, trying to understand how this could happen. Standing in front of his mistress, he asked with a trembling voice whether someone had really hit her. Shortly before this, the Marchioness had said that her nephew's reputation was suffering because of Miss Falone, but as a man, he had certain needs, so she tolerated her, but warned them not to forget to protect themselves. She added that an illegitimate child would tarnish his honor even more, and she would not tolerate that. Rowena was not going to tolerate her hurtful words, so she said that he loved her. After this, she suggested that if she became pregnant, then the vile woman would no longer be able to dictate her terms. Hearing the rudeness addressed to her, the Marquise became very angry and slapped the offender in the face with all her might. Therefore, now the girl said that she herself was to blame for her stupidity, having insulted the Marquise. The Duke asked his aunt to explain herself to him, asking whether she told the story truthfully. He looked at the Marquise with a cold gaze and asked how his stupid mistress had insulted his beloved aunt. The woman was stunned that her nephew would so brazenly take the side of a woman she disliked. Madame Gertrude tried to explain to him that, in her opinion, he had understood everything wrong. Taking off his coat, Killian wondered if Miss Falone had been disrespectful, then added that they were just trying to figure out the situation. Giving the coat to the maid, he curiously asked if they thought it was strange. Madame Gertrude and the Marchioness of Wessex shook with fear and began to look at each other. The maid reported that when the girl came down the stairs, she poured tea on the marquise, to which the woman confirmed her words, saying that she simply wanted to teach her manners. Rowena entered the conversation, saying that Madame Gertrude was telling the truth. The girl embarrassedly stated that she had simply stumbled, so she deserved that slap. With a trembling hand, she took him by the sleeve, telling him that there was nothing to worry about, and he should not be angry. He took her trembling hands, put them to her ears, and ordered her to go upstairs immediately. Looking at her with an alarmed look, the Duke ordered the same thing even louder. Frightened, his mistress nodded obediently and quickly ran up the stairs. A few seconds later, a vase fell next to the marquise, which he threw, saying that it happened by accident. The Duke began to roll up his sleeves, intending to break everything that was in the sideboard. To the surprise of the marquise, he stated that she had always wanted the service that the Queen gave to his mother, after which he added that she should catch it, because it was his gift for teaching the girl manners. Killian began throwing mugs at her with all his might, and the Marquise of Complaints pressed herself against the door, which was behind her. She screamed for someone to come to her aid, and since Madame Gertrude was in the room, she ran to her first. Taking another item from the sideboard, the Duke mockingly asked why she didn't catch anything. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the swords hanging on the wall, which his aunt had also once liked. The Marquise trembled even more, realizing what he was going to do with these swords. The man was about to go for the sword, when suddenly trembling hands grabbed him from behind, and a thin voice asked him to stop. The trembling Rowena, through her fear, tried to tell him that she was very scared. The mistress continued to cry and say that only she was to blame for everything. Trying to brush her off, the Duke sternly reminded her that he had ordered her to go upstairs. Suddenly, Rowena lost consciousness, but he managed to catch her in time, allowing me to fall to the floor. Her face was streaked with tears, her breathing was ragged, and her body was a blur in his arms. The next day, the girl woke up and asked her maid to bring her some water. Melissa looked worriedly at her mistress and asked how she was feeling. She added that she was afraid that she would not wake up, after which she brought her water. Rowena looked at Melissa gratefully, drank some water, and then asked where she was. The girl was lying in a bed that stood in a room she had never been in before. The maid explained that this was another estate of the Duke of Devonshire, and she had never been here either. The Duke's mistress vaguely remembered what happened last night. She asked how she ended up in this room, to which Melissa said that she suddenly felt sick. The other maids told her that in the evening, the Duke carried her to the new estate in his arms. Rowena was very embarrassed that the man would do such a thing, but later asked what happened to the Marchioness and Madame Gertrude. Just as the maid was about to answer her question, there was suddenly a knock on the door. Another maid came to her, asking her mistress if she had woken up. Seeing the misunderstanding on her face, the girl introduced herself that her name was Bianca, and that from that day on, she would be the housekeeper. Rowena understood that the newcomer belonged to the minor nobility, like Madame Gertrude, but her thoughts were interrupted by a voice saying that I would bring breakfast now. Seeing various dishes in front of her, the girl could not remain silent and said that it was delicious. Bianca asked her not to get up and lie down on the bed, because she would help her and serve breakfast right in bed. The Duke's mistress was interested in where her lover was now, to which the housekeeper said that he got up early in the morning and left to discuss taxation for the current year, but promised to be there by lunchtime. The girl added that if she needed anything, she could ring the bell, which she would leave on the table. Rowena sighed heavily, to which Bianca asked if she really wanted something. Her mistress informed her that she did not have to treat her with such respect. She remembered that she had never been treated like this, so she didn't even know how to react. In response to her words that they shouldn't bother so much, the maid screamed loudly. She talked about how she should be treated with respect because she deserved it. The housekeeper also added that the Duke personally ordered them to take care of her with all their might. Bianca said that she would do everything in her power to make her comfortable in their estate. In the evening, the Duke of Devonshire returned, greeted at the entrance by his housekeeper Bianca. Taking off his coat, he asked if anything unusual had happened, to which she replied that everything was calm. When he looked up, Rowena Falone was already waiting for him on the stairs, dressed in a beautiful lavender dress. He smiled affectionately and nobly extended his hand to her, inviting her to follow him. The girl shyly offered him her hand, ready to follow him anywhere. The man asked her if she had lunch, to which she answered negatively. Killian calmly suggested that they have lunch together, adding that they could go wherever she wanted. Rowena was a little surprised that he wasn't mad at her for interfering last night. Having arrived at the right place, she happily offered to have lunch at this restaurant. All the tables around them were empty, and they were filled with various dishes and drinks. The man asked how she liked the estate, to which she replied that it was even larger than she could imagine. He then asked how she liked the new maids and housekeeper Bianca, to which the girl replied that they were all incredibly kind to her. Killian had always given her the best, but unlike other aristocrats, he never held formal parties to show off his wealth. But now he had paid for an entire restaurant, so she felt very embarrassed. He calmly announced that during the ball season she would live in this estate. After listening to him, the girl asked what happened to Madame Gertrude and the Marchioness of Wessex. There was a short silence in the room, after which he announced that the housekeeper had received a disciplinary sanction, and his aunt would go to a sanatorium for 6 months. He added that she should not worry, because she would never see these two again. Breathing a sigh of relief, she thought about how she was afraid that they would get a lot of trouble. The man looked at her carefully, trying to understand whether the girl from the village was kind and pure, or whether she was a seductress. Without beating around the bush, the Duke immediately asked if she knew a man named William. The girl didn't know what to answer, because she didn't expect such a question from him. She thought that she couldn't tell him the truth, because he probably wouldn't believe it, because it often happened that he could lose control of himself. Once on vacation, one guy offered to take her to the mansion, covering her with an umbrella from the rain. After he helped her, the guy disappeared without a trace, and his store was closed. Therefore, now, if she tells the truth to the Duke, Melissa could be fired or even closed down by the publishing house. Rowena, trying to speak calmly, said that this was an old acquaintance of hers who had come to the city for a few days, so she decided to meet with him. Then the Duke decided to clarify why she met him in men's clothing. To this, the girl replied that they met him only once, and there was nothing between them. The man looked at her incredulously and asked in a cold voice if he really was just an old acquaintance. Immediately after dinner, they headed to the manor, where Rowena decided to take a bath. The question about William ruined their entire evening, so neither of them said a word on the way home. The Duke of Devonshire silently and condemningly continued to look at her with a cold gaze. His face expressed a lot, so it seemed to the girl that he was definitely angry with her. So now sitting in the bathroom, she couldn't stop thinking about it, which gave her a headache. Melissa helpfully asked her if she was okay, to which she replied that she had eaten a little too much at dinner. Holding a rose in her hands, Rowena tried to understand whether he knew everything about what she was planning, but later decided that then he would not ask, looking for confirmation, but would begin to act. Suddenly, the man whom the maid saw first entered the bathroom. Sensing something was wrong, the girl turned in the direction Melissa was looking at. She saw Killian slowly approaching her, but still looking at her angrily. The man simply stood in front of the bathroom, and the maid became worried and asked what she should do. Turning to Melissa, he sternly ordered her to leave the room so they could talk. Seeing his chilling gaze, the maid quickly disappeared from his sight. He lifted his face by the chin of his mistress, to which she asked if she had really done something wrong again. Looking into her eyes, wide with fear, the Duke quickly shook his head. The man continued to watch the helpless naked girl, who was trying not to be embarrassed. Then he grabbed her hand and with a sharp movement pulled her towards him, holding her behind her back. Killian bent down and ordered her to remove her hand, after which he took her by force right in the bathroom. When it got dark, he finally let go of his mistress and went about his business. The girl sitting on the chair timidly asked him to stop because she wanted to know something. With a trembling hand, she managed to grab his shirt sleeve, after which he finally looked at her. Rowena was interested in only one question, which she asked him after some silence. She fearfully wanted to ask if he loved her even just a little, but she never dared to say so. The girl had long doubted his feelings for her, but did not understand why he continued to be around. Hold him by the sleeve. The mistress fearfully asked if he was tired of her and if he would leave her. To her deepest regret, Rowena heard that he had no idea what he would do with her. She thought that perhaps he misunderstood her reaction in the restaurant, and if she said that she loved him, then he would understand everything. Trying to say something, the girl did not notice how he freed himself from her grip. When leaving, Killian strictly ordered her not to stick her head out of the estate for a while so that he would not get tired of her. After leaving the room, the man left her alone with this information, believing that she deserved it. After about half an hour, he was already sitting in an abandoned building, and in front of him was a shackled man. His men grabbed the guy, beat him, and handcuffed him to the floor, waiting for their master to come. The Duke looked at him coldly and said that he should stop repeating the same things because he was getting bored, after which he asked who the man worked for. The chained man did not answer, so the man said that he was stupider than he thought. The beaten guy was breathing heavily. Blood from a head wound was warm on his cheek, and his body was completely covered in bruises. Loading the gun, Killian said that he was not cunning enough to pretend to be his ward and gradually extract information, to which his main subordinate apologized for allowing such a thing. Pointing the gun at the guy, he quietly said that the Southerners, of course, are smart, but he was always one step ahead. When the guy asked him to kill him, the Duke asked why he would kill. A loud shot was heard, after which the guy moaned that he couldn't feel his legs, to which the man said that he was squealing like a pig being slaughtered. His devoted person asked what they should do next, because this could be perceived as a declaration of war, to which the Duke replied that they were the first to send them a gift, which was impolite to leave unanswered. Just when Killian said that they could still come to an agreement, the wounded man shouted out to him loudly. The guy furiously declared that a monstrous death awaited him because he would die in agony. He continued, saying that his mat would be passed around in a circle, but he didn't have time to finish because the man quickly grabbed him by the hair. The wounded man fell silent, but the Duke did not let up, after which he announced that he had changed his mind. Wiping the blood from his face, Killian ordered the men to cut him into small pieces and throw him into the harbor. His confidant ordered his men to clean up the place so that no evidence was left behind. The Duke of Devonshire returned to his chair and carefully wiped the blood from his hands. Zenock, his faithful assistant, looked tiredly at everything that was happening and thought that the old man would go crazy when he saw this. Someone asked the Duke if his lordship really shot the guy personally, to which he asked what Zenock had been doing all this time. The old man who came said that the empty mongrel wanted her, but he could not allow his master to get his hands dirty with blood. Coming closer to Zenock, the elderly man declared that he had mistaken him, to which the Duke's right-hand man greeted Lord Sussex. Zenock Cleven, Killian's right-hand man, was involved in the Duke's underground affairs, and Baron Benedict of Sussex was involved in public affairs. But at the same time, Zenock rose from the very bottom, and the Baron was a hereditary aristocrat. To his words that he warned that one should not trust any trash, Zenock replied that if he was hinting at him, then he was simply tired of living. Their argument was interrupted by the Duke, who said that they needed to discuss further actions. The Baron said they found it Giltis to hide his assets, but it was starting to attract attention. He added that in order to avoid even greater suspicions, one must follow the Queen's lead and agree to the wedding, to which he replied that they discussed it, and the Baron himself was against this idea. The excited old man quietly announced that the situation had now changed. Baron Benedict stated that they were attracting more and more attention, and if the Queen found out that they were making plans behind her back, then Miss Falone's safety would be at risk. Killian asked if he was really offering him to become the Queen's pet, to which the old man replied that he would need to turn the situation in his favor. He suggested that if he pretended to fix it, he would give the Queen what she wanted and distract her from what she shouldn't know. Benedict claimed that he himself said that he wanted to increase his strength in secret from her, so that no one else would dare to order him. The Duke came from an ancient noble family, and until recently, they were almost the most influential family in Islewood, because the previous Duke of Devonshire was quiet and obedient, marrying the one his elder sister chose for him. A year after Killian was born, his father left the mansion as if he had fulfilled his duty. But 10 years later, he died in a terrible fire along with his mistress. But everyone doubted that it was an accident, but no one even investigated the matter. The Baron of Sussex was the one who drew up the wedding contract, so he was at the center of what happened. The contract stipulated that in the event of treason on the part of the Duke, the Duchess would receive alimony in the double amount of her dowry, but if the Duke died due to an accident, then only meager compensation awaited her. So many believed that the Queen had killed her own brother, making it look like an accident so as not to pay huge alimony payments. Having received the agreed compensation, his mother returned to her homeland and abandoned him in the mansion, after which the Queen gave him vast lands, trying to make amends for leaving him with an orphan. The Queen could never control him, and had no idea that an innocent child would think of putting a gun to the back of her head. Therefore, now the Baron reasoned that they had conducted an investigation and found out that the wife that the Queen had chosen for him was open to negotiations because she simply wanted to get out of her father's shadow. He said that if the Duke helps her in this, then their union will benefit both, and when they divorce, he will be able to make Miss Falone whoever he wants. Killian asked if that was exactly what he said, to which the old man replied that they interrogated him. The old man said that a man claims that William Zeno is Miss Falone's lover. There was an awkward silence in the room, followed by the Duke's loud laughter. He exhaled deeply and said that he had beaten them to it because he knew that he was simply the president of a publishing company to which his mistress had sent her manuscript. The Duke added that Gertrude should have told him about this, but the old man announced that they had a witness. Melissa entered the room, introduced herself to His Highness, and announced that she was Rowena's personal maid. In a trembling voice, he asked if she was the one who watched her mistress's every move. Having controlled himself, he asked in a stern voice if she really wanted to tell him something. Closing her eyes, the maid, shaking with fear, blurted out that her mistress was dating Mr. William. The girl reported that Rowena said that she was in love with him as a child, and then they met again. Melissa said that her mistress was afraid that he would marry and leave her, so she decided to extract as much money from him as possible and run away with Mr. William, and she dressed as a man to avoid suspicion. The Baron smiled contentedly, watching how the Duke gradually grew wild with every word the maid uttered. Later at night, he thought about how traitors don't live long, thinking about his nanny who turned him into the Queen when he was 14, and also about an acquaintance who organized an assassination attempt on him while studying abroad, and did not forget about the professor, who pretended to be his mentor in order to build a career for himself at his expense. All these people disappeared without a trace, and there were never any exceptions, so he headed to the room of his mistress, who was sleeping peacefully in her bed. Opening her eyes, the girl saw the Duke standing in front of her, but half asleep, she did not fully understand what was happening. Having woken up completely, she asked him in surprise what he was doing in her room. Rising from the bed, Rowena asked him if she was sleeping, because he had never been with her at night. She added that she was probably all dreaming, because he had never watched her sleep. To his affirmative answer, the girl stated that in this case she did not want to wake up. He sat down next to him because she asked him to stay with him until she fell asleep again. Rowena talked about how she was so happy that the sleep seemed to have vanished. He gently closed her eyes, asking her to fall asleep as soon as possible, while he continued to look at her angrily. When she woke up the next morning, the first thing she did was check the place next to her. She wasn't sure, but in the end, last night had been just a dream. 5 days had already passed since their trip to the restaurant, and the company that planned to accept her book for publication had closed, and the building manager said that he did not know any William Zeno. Rowena quietly whispered that she needed to listen to her intuition because she was deceived again. She had a strong feeling that her whole life was a ball of tangled threads that could not be separated. Hearing someone enter the room, she happily greeted her maid. She quietly asked Melissa to help her put up her hair, not suspecting that it was not her at all. Coming closer to her, the Duke gently touched her hair and softly called her name. Turning around, she saw Killian, who told her that she shouldn't bother with her hair. He added that she looked much more beautiful with her hair down, to which the girl thought that his touch had changed a little. Rowena asked him if last night was a dream, to which he asked her if she wanted it to be so. In response to her negative response, the man timidly kissed the top of her head and declared that he had crossed the line that night. Rubbing the place of the kiss, she thought that it was time to tell him the whole truth. Looking into his eyes, she felt ashamed because she felt like a fool, so she was going to tell him everything. The girl did not have time to say anything, as he took her hand, began to put on the ring, and said that he realized that he was mistaken when he decided to leave her in this position for 3 whole years. After that, the Duke allowed her to call him by his name, so she asked him if it was an engagement ring. Killian told her that this was a gift that he should have given a long time ago. To her question about whether he was sure that he wanted to give her this ring, he asked if she really thought that he had better change his mind. After these words, she rushed into his arms. The man told her that ever since the day he met her with a swollen cheek, a question had been stuck in his mind. The Duke stated that he tried to brush him off, which is why he was so cruel, but all the denial in the world would not be enough to change his feelings. So for the last 5 days, all he thought about was how important she was to him, to which the girl responded very happy to hear this. He said that they would go to her favorite island, where they would spend the whole summer, but first he had to deal with work, so he would arrive later. Killian kissed her tenderly and asked her to wait for him at their country house, because he would arrive there before she could blink an eye. A few days later, she stood on the seashore, waiting for the ship with her lover to arrive. A boy who loved to spend time with her constantly came running to her and called her madam. The girl constantly told him that he could call her by name, to which the boy replied that it was impolite to call a woman of noble blood by name. The boy's name was Tommy, and he was the son of the island's governor, to whom she endlessly told that there was nothing noble about her. When she asked whether the governor had really sent him, the boy said that he simply saw her on the shore. This island was far from the capital, so there were few people on it. But after Killian began to develop businesses on it, the threatening economy revived again, and thanks to this, the island's inhabitants were kind to her. Rowena invited him to keep her company, saying that the weather was good, so she was drawn to take a walk. Taking her hand, the boy walked quickly after her, sometimes looking embarrassed. He thought that she was the most beautiful person in the world, and that she was also very kind to a child like him. Deciding to break the silence, Tommy reported that his father had said that she was very important to the Duke. He added that she would become a person whom ordinary people would not even dare to look at. Despite the beautiful promises, she had been waiting for the Duke on this island for 15 days and was slowly starting to worry. The boy curiously asked if he and the Duke would really get married soon. He confidently stated that he knew about everything because his father was very busy preparing for their wedding. Tommy confided that he heard that the Duke of Devonshire would arrive today. Seeing the surprise in her eyes, the boy understood and apologized, saying that apparently it was supposed to be a surprise. Rowena joyfully hugged him and thanked him from the bottom of her heart for this news, which greatly embarrassed the boy. Leaving him alone, she quickly ran along the beach towards the pier where all the ships were sailing. The girl ran so fast that her white hat flew off, but this did not bother her because she decided that she was worrying in vain. Running to the pier, she saw her old friend Melissa, who was standing among the crowd of people. Calling her, Rowena saw a little fear in her face, but she didn't care at that moment. When the girl approached her, the maid asked why she was here, to which she replied that she heard that the Duke was coming. Seeing someone about to descend from the ship, she joyfully looked to the side. The mistress quickly changed her face because she saw something that unsettled her. Next to the Duke of Devonshire stood a beautiful blonde lady with green eyes. Killian looked coldly at his past lover and had no intention of saying anything. When they descended, Rowena could not understand what kind of woman was walking next to him. The girl decided that it would be better to avoid hasty decisions and not react sharply. She suggested that it could be a distant relative whom he invited to the wedding. As soon as she began to speak, she was immediately interrupted by a stranger who addressed the Duke. Killian said that he was glad to see her on the pier, and the girl's hand touched his shoulder. He hugged her shoulder and announced that this was his future wife, Chloe Aberdeen. Such a statement greatly stunned the unfortunate Rowena, who had recently believed that she would become his future wife. Gathering her courage, she asked in a trembling voice if she had obeyed her. The Duke looked at her coldly, enjoying the reaction on her face. Standing in front of them, the girl could not accept the fact that she was again deceived. She immediately remembered the words of the maids, who discussed that the Duke still loved his dead bride. Memories of the day he gave her the ring also flashed through her mind. But now that she understood the absurdity of what was happening, she was tormented by one question about when it all started. The people standing around them began to whisper loudly and discuss the current situation. The Duke tried to say something to his mistress, but was immediately stopped by his future wife. She assured him that the girl's reaction was understandable because she did not expect to hear such news. Killian ordered the maid to escort Rowena to the estate because she wasn't feeling well. Melissa immediately agreed, walked up to the girl, and led her towards the estate. Rowena followed her blindly, unable to see anything because of her tears and trembling in her body. The governor of the island himself came to meet the bride and groom who remained on the pier. When asked by the Duke whether the room was ready for Miss Aberdeen, the man answered in the affirmative. The Duke apologized to his future wife for the fact that his mistress lacked proper manners. Chloe said that she thought it was not a matter of manners at all, because she's also a woman, so she completely understood her reaction. Looking at her future husband, she thought that this was the man whose marriage was beneficial to both of them, without any love, but only cold calculation. But after seeing him in person, the girl changed her mind, wanting to get his heart. As she watched him, she thought about how she had once been worried that Miss Falone would be a threat, because people were talking so much about her, but he had gotten rid of her instantly. Approaching him, Chloe suggested that they take a short walk before they went to the estate. Looking at him slyly, she asked if he could show her the island. Arriving at her room, Rowena sat down on the bed, hugging her knees, and did not move until the evening. Her loneliness was interrupted by a loud knock on the door, which brought her out of her thoughts. The Duke of Devonshire stood in the aisle, looking at her with the same cold gaze. As soon as she noticed him, she loudly screamed that he should not dare to approach her. The man asked if it seemed to her that she had exhausted her daily supply of insolence this morning. Taking her face, Killian reminded her that he feeds and clothes her, and that she also lives in his house. The girl screamed that she didn't need it at all, after which she pushed him away from her with all her strength. At her speech that she was going to leave, he grabbed her hand and menacingly clarified where she was going. The Duke continued to look at her as if she were nothing, realizing that she was not going anywhere. Seeing tears flowing from her eyes, he inwardly rejoiced that his pitiful, lovely mistress was helpless. As soon as she began to speak, he immediately interrupted her and began to wipe away her tears. Gently rubbing his face, the Duke calmly announced that he would get married in 2 weeks. His chilling gaze and obvious composure made the girl tell him that he was a demon. She continued to talk about how he was a monster, a cruel and heartless bastard, and then asked why he gave her a ring, and acted as if he was going to marry her if he decided to leave her in the first place. Raising an eyebrow, he discreetly explained that he had not promised her anything, but had simply decided to give her a gift, like many times before. Rowena didn't want to hear anything. Her whole body was trembling from misunderstanding and the lack of any logic in his actions. He indignantly asked what she expected, to which the girl replied that he understood perfectly well how she would treat him. The Duke declared that he had never betrayed his soul in front of her, and Rowena, in a trembling voice, said that she loved him. Hearing these words, Killian furiously attacked her, throwing the girl onto the bed. Holding her hand to his chest, he reminded her that she had just said that she loved him, and then ordered her to prove it. After some time, he again took possession of her, but this time Rowena felt used. Rising from the bed, she saw the money in the envelope, to which the Duke explained that she should consider this a gesture of goodwill, and if she suddenly needed more, she could safely ask him. Looking at the money and hearing his comments, the lover could not help but laugh. Tensing nervously, Killian irritably asked what she found funny about the money. The girl mockingly asked if he had ever felt any feelings for her. Getting ready to leave, the Duke said that he had never loved her. I was not just having a good time. Finally looking at her, he saw that she was covered in tears, which greatly pleased him. Many years later, a woman burst into her room, saying that she had not paid rent again. The woman wondered if she had really chosen a more comfortable bench for herself and her son, because at this rate, she would spend the night on the bench, to which the girl replied that she planned to come to her herself and hand over the money. Having received payment for housing, she added that if next time she was late even a day, she would kick them to hell. Closing the door, Rebecca heard a gentle child's voice calling her, scanning the word mom. Her name was now Rebecca, and she had a beautiful little 5-year-old son named Damien. Seeing the sleepy child, she said that the landlady had come to chat with her. Patting him on the top of his head, she asked if they really woke him up, to which the boy replied that he was just a little cold. Having touched his forehead, Rebecca realized that he was feverish again, and said that they needed to see Dr. McWood again. That damn night, only a fleeting feeling, like a night breeze, prevented her from committing suicide. Rowena couldn't help but think that she had a delay, and this feeling turned out to be not unfounded, because she soon found out that she was pregnant. She was afraid that Killian would take the child if he found out about him, so she changed her name and moved to a city where no one knew her, after which she rented an old room, in which there was barely enough space to turn around, and took on any job at any time pregnancy. By the time she gave birth, the newspapers were full of headlines that Killian Devonshire and Chloe Aberdeen had moved to another country. Now they were sitting with the doctor, who said that if the boy took medicine regularly, the fever would soon go away. Exhaling in a relaxed manner, the girl thanked the doctor from the bottom of her heart, who had helped her out so often. Damien was a sickly child, and the birth was attended by a midwife, who at the last moment was pulled out of somewhere in the slums, and from that very second, the boy experienced a whole galaxy of various health problems. Her son talked about how, since he took his medications regularly and was a good boy, who deserved a toy, to which she replied that it would be as a holiday gift. She thought that she had no money yet, but she could work more in the evenings and find another part-time job. The doctor handed the boy some sweets, saying that he could help himself to them, to which Damien asked his mother if he could take one. Rebecca told the doctor that he didn't have to spoil them like that, because he had already done a lot for her, to which the guy replied that his nephew was about the same age as Damien, so he always has candy. The joyful girl embarrassedly thanked the doctor for his kindness. She then nudged her son, reminding him that he too should thank the kind man. When they left, the doctor thought that he had once heard that Rebecca's husband died due to an accident 5 years ago, so the women looked at her with pity and gossiped about how she wandered from place to place until ended up in this city. The young doctor was very worried about her and her son, who had to go through a lot. His thoughts were interrupted by a nurse who came in and shouted loudly that someone had come to see him. She explained in a trembling voice that some man wanted to see him and was looking for someone. A few seconds later, the doctor was grabbed by 2 unknown people, after which the same stranger the nurse was talking about entered the room. Squatting down, the man said that he would ask this question only once, after which he began to say that she was a blonde with green eyes, about 30 years old. He also said that her name was Rowena Filoni, but he assumed that she used a different name. The guy immediately realized that he was talking about Rebecca, but to his question about whether he had seen someone similar, he steadfastly answered no. The stranger handed him a business card and said that if he came across someone like him, he would have to contact this hotel and ask to call Zena Cleven. At the same time, Rebecca and her son Damien went to see their friend Harriet. Her son loved Aunt Harriet very much, so he was very glad to come to them again. Rebecca timidly thanked her for taking her son in again, to which the woman replied that her children loved to play with him. Harriet is the manager of a textile factory, and it so happened that in the last 5 years, the girl counted on her very much because it was she who called the midwife and got her a job. The woman told her that she came to their city when she was pregnant with twins, so not only were they colleagues, but they also gave birth at about the same time, so they could be considered sisters. Rebecca said she would return for her son the next morning and thanked her friend again. Before the girl left, Harriet asked how she liked young Dr. McWood. She added that her feminine heart felt that he really liked her, to which she replied that she had mixed up something, because he was young and single, and we were with a child. The woman stated that Damien was growing up, and the boy needed a father, to which Rebecca noted that time had passed quickly. Sitting down at the table, Harriet tiredly leaned on her elbows, causing a newspaper to fall from the table, which Rebecca decided to pick up. Bending down to pick up the fallen object, she was suddenly hit with a chilling cold from the article written in it. The article stated that the Duke of Devonshire had returned to Islewood in the morning, having recently separated from his wife, who was found to be barren. Rebecca didn't move for a while because her whole body was trembling with fear. The alarming voice of her friend called out to her, telling her that she was not herself. The girl hastily replied that she had to go, otherwise she would be late for work. She ran down the street, thinking that nothing would happen, because his return did not concern her. Rebecca recalled with horror that last night when he left her money and told her that he had never had any feelings for her. Having run home, she began to sort through her things. I thought that if she ran away, she needed to pawn something so that she would have money to escape. She found among her things the same ring that he had once given her, but the girl did not take any money or any things, and the ring was as a reserve for the most extreme case. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and later words followed about whether she could come in. Rebecca invited her colleague Anna to come inside, after which she asked if she had really been robbed, because there was bedlam all around. The girl reported that she was just looking for something, but would be ready to go out soon. Noticing a ring among her things, Anna thought about how such a poor woman got something so expensive. Deciding to steal it, the girl deliberately pushed the glass off the table, after which it broke. Rebecca calmly said that she would bring a broom now and advised her not to move so as not to step on the glass. Anna was not going to wait until she removed the glass and immediately headed towards the ring. The girl quickly returned with a broom, asking her friend if she was hurt, to which she replied that she was fine. The thief said that since she broke the glass, she should sweep up all the pieces. The shock of the headlines quickly wore off, and serene life returned, with the only exception being that Rebecca started working a little more to save up for Damien's Christmas present. Her son began to spend the night with Harriet more often, and sometimes the woman saw him crying and calling for his mother in her dreams. The worried woman couldn't do anything about it because she knew that otherwise the boy wouldn't have a Christmas. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, after which a woman's voice announced that she was entering. It turned out to be Rebecca, who came to pick up her son, to which her friend said that he behaved like a real angel, after which she asked to leave him more often, because while he was around, the twins did not bother her. The girl thanked Harriet from the bottom of her heart for being so helpful with her son. The woman smiled sweetly and told her to be careful when going to her home, because it was night outside. As soon as the door slammed, the woman tiredly landed on a chair and sighed heavily. She couldn't help but wonder who Damien's father was, and suggested that if the son took after his father, then he must be very handsome. It seemed to Harriet that if his father had been with Rebecca, she wouldn't have to work so hard, and Damien wouldn't be so lonely. There was a knock on the door again, but this time the woman had no idea who could come to her. Opening the door, she saw a young doctor who was clearly running towards her as fast as he could, after which she asked what brought him to her at such a late hour. To his question about whether Rebecca had come to see her, the woman truthfully answered that they had literally missed each other by a minute. The guy said that a man came to his clinic looking for her, but he was afraid that he was being followed, so he did not go to Rebecca. He added that the stranger had called her Rowena Filoni, after which the woman asked if he thought that Damien's father was looking for her. The young doctor said that he did not look at all like a child, and then remembered that the man's name was Zeneca Clivon. Harriet suggested that it might be a gambling den owner who had made a fortune from less legal things, lending black money and selling illegal alcohol, and then the doctor asked her to warn her friend. As he left, he advised her to be careful and not open the door to strangers. Left alone, she could not understand why the owner of the gambling house was looking for her friend, and then assumed that Rebecca owed him money. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the door, which made her whole body clench in horror. Deciding that she needed a weapon, the woman picked up a knife and opened the door with a trembling hand. On the way home, Rebecca met her friend, who told her that Anna had disappeared, asking for an advance payment for the next month. An acquaintance told her that she lived with a man and probably escaped with him, after which she said that the police were already aware of everything.